All right. Well, we are back for our next session. Hope you had a great time at networking. Hope you met some interesting people. And I hope you click that button that says connect so that you get an email connecting you with the person you talked with. We'll have more opportunities to network later on, and specifically during the startup crawl, which, as a reminder, that will happen in Sakoko. If you haven't used Sakoko yet, it is so cool. It is basically like Sims for an office environment. It's a virtual office environment. There are so many cool startups that are going to be presenting at that. So check your email if you registered. Make sure that you create a profile on Sakoko and go and check that out. So we've had a lot of really interesting conversations around secure autonomy today. And our next session is definitely going to continue to explore those topics. Last session, I don't know if I knew this, but the idea of being able to use and collect ocean garbage autonomously to build houses. Ocean Roombas, that's going to be my new band name, I think. Anyway, we're going to be talking about vulnerability at the edge, and we have an amazing group of panelists today. Oh, and one more thing before I forget. I had this in my notes and I forgot to mention it. We have the Veterans in Tech Summit coming up on November 10th, so make sure that you check that out and register for that. That's another really great event that we have going on here. Of course, it's going to be all virtual. We'd love to see you at that. So Veterans in Tech Summit on November 10th. All right. Without further ado, I would like to bring up to the stage a friend of Capital Factories. He's been a startup founder here and has really just helped to bring the cybersecurity community together. Marcus Carey, who is the enterprise architect at ReliaQuest. Marcus, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Sean. I'm very pumped to be here, and hopefully you'll enjoy this next session.
Oh yeah, well, we're excited to hear from you guys. Why don't you bring up the panelists?
Okay, I want to introduce our panelists today. Brian Korchan. I'm sorry if I mispronounced it, brother. Lloyd Greenwald and Jen Savage. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves really briefly, so you understand how they got into cybersecurity. So Jen Savage.
Sure. So I used to work in software development for maybe 10 years or so. And then after that, at the time that I worked in security, I always was very curious, or when I worked in development, I was always very curious about security. I used to attend conferences and whatnot. I started doing my own security research in my spare time. I gave some talks at various conferences like DEF CON and Black Hat. And then I transitioned over to working as a penetration tester full time. So I switched basically from development to security. And I think this is a really excellent way to get into the security industry, because if you have a development background, you understand what developers are likely doing, even if you don't have access to the code for, the application that you're testing. So anyway, so now I am a member of the Black Hat Review Board. I've been on that for about 6 years, and I work full-time as a application penetration tester.
Thank you very much. Brian, can you please, I'm sorry for butchering your name, could you please introduce yourself with your name as well?
Certainly. My name is Brian Korchan. You did better than most. No worries there. Like most of the IT professionals from my era, I come from someplace else and not a world of IT operations or security. Originally started off as a nuclear power plant operator for the Navy, which gave me a very strong systems engineering approach, which I'm sure will come in later in the discussions, and things like root cause action analysis. But anyways, I'd gotten out, I was working as a chemist, and I went into my boss's office and asked for an updated PowerPoint presentation of something. And he literally went through, half the crowd won't know what I'm talking about a stack of 200 3.5-inch floppy disks to try to find the right PowerPoint. And I asked him, maybe they'd ever heard of a hard drive. He told me they failed all the time. And I said, when was the last time your hard drive failed? When was the last time that floppy failed? The next day, he appointed me as sysadmin for the network for that particular Army post. And I never looked back. But a simple application of statistics got me into the IT operations. But from that role, I then became the Netcom G6, the first G6 for Netcom, working on CONUS networks and Netcom headquarters. As an aside gig, I'd been a Navy Reserve Intel officer for about the previous 10 years and found myself deployed to Afghanistan. I ran into General Alexander, who was Durnsett at the time. What was a 1-minute brief turned into a 2-hour conversation and a direct offer from General Alexander to come work at NSA and TAO, where I was almost the IT anti-security person because my job was to bypass all those security measures that people did or did not put in networks. So about 8 years doing that. It was a major eye-opener to IT operations. And then I did a short stint with the Air Force, leading policy and programs and oversight for all the offensive and defensive cyber operations for the Air Force. And I'm now a very new employee with MITRE as the co-lead for Air Combat Command. And I'm starting MITRE's venture into information warfare by creating a cross-cutting outcome for IW. And that's
appreciate that. Thanks a lot, shipmate. And for all the sailors out there, I'm a golden shellback and Brian's a polywog.
I'm a wog. All
right, Lloyd. Lloyd, super smart. Lloyd Greenwald from CACI.
Sure. Thank you, Marcus. So my background started in artificial intelligence and networking. I was a professor for a while, teaching robotics and artificial intelligence and networking. And then I moved on to Bell Labs, which at the time was part of Lucent. And we moved into cybersecurity at that time. So a combination of ad hoc networking, cybersecurity, and AI. We got acquired by CACI recently. And what we focus on, we're a pretty big group in research. We've been fortunate enough to do mostly research in cybersecurity, not as much hands-on pen testing or practical aspects, although other people in our area do that. But my area is the research end. We do a lot of DARPA work. We do a lot of cutting edge, trying to figure out what are the hard problems that aren't solved right now, what do we need to defend the nation in about 5 or 10 years, and how do we solve those problems now? So we're fortunate enough to do a lot of that work. And we're fortunate that some of our work is transitioning to operations. In particular, some of our decoy work, decoy content is transitioning to operations, and we're pretty excited about that.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear about some of the stuff you got cooking, Lloyd. So one of the first things I want to talk about, the thing that's in the news every day, and the thing that everybody's worried about, and I'm gonna start off with Jen, and I actually distributed some questions out, and so this is kind of a weird question, but hopefully you had a lot of time a little bit of time to let this marinate. How has the COVID-19 pandemic showed a pro or con for autonomous edge systems? I'm going to start off with Jen.
Sure. I think obviously, people are becoming a little more reliant on autonomous systems during this time, and systems in general, all systems. We're having this conference online. So obviously it's been great for business. And I think also at least as far as things like SCADA, ICS installations, et cetera, servicing those doesn't really require a lot of interaction. A lot of the work we do as if you're a developer or a pen tester or whatever, may not require that you be in person. So we've been able, as an industry, we've been insulated a little bit from a lot of the things people are going through. I haven't had to leave my house really because I have so many options. I have groceries delivered. At least as far as I'm concerned, I think we haven't seen a lot of negatives from COVID. If anything, we've proved our worth more. So that's just my opinion.
Fantastic. Lloyd.
Yeah, my thoughts on COVID are kind of my thoughts on, we do some work in edge computing, right? And I think that's part of the theme of this session is what can you do on the edge? And previously, edge computing becomes a really important issue when you have very bad bandwidth. So I think COVID is kind of changing that a little bit. So it's kind of getting us into an environment where people had bad bandwidth, but they can't really do their job with bad bandwidth anymore. So we're increasing the amount of bandwidth people have on the edge. So the trade-offs between when you do edge computing versus when you do cloud computing or something in between, those trade-offs have kind of changed. And they're kind of getting us introduced to the world of 5G, where those trade-offs are going to change again. So it's a nice way to rethink about edge computing.
Oh, that's great. Ron?
So I agree with both of them because I think it's a little bit of both. I think that the first answer is that it has certainly increased the use of edge systems, edge computing. It's certainly shown us the reliability of our network linkages, and I see that in San Antonio every day with my poor network connectivity. But I think it's also, and it'll point out something we will probably talk about later on, is as we rapidly went into this when COVID hit, a lot of people probably displayed bad or poor behavior and cybersecurity behavior on standing up systems and implementing those systems as rapidly as possible. We were told to just download this app and make it work. And how many collaboration apps do we now have on our computers? And we did it because we were told to do it. We had to get up and running. And that is a surefire way to increase or to allow vulnerabilities to be exploited in our networks. And I'm sure we'll see that later on as hacks start to occur more frequently.
So you mean loading all these remote apps is a bad thing?
Well, and remember, a lot of people are low to moderate skilled in cybersecurity, and they click the link that gets sent to them in the email, and that causes a lot of problems.
That's right. That's right. All right. Next question. We're going to start off with Lloyd here. Lloyd, what are some of the traditional attack vectors in cybersecurity, such as ransomware, related to autonomous edge systems?
Yeah, so I had an answer to that, and then I watched the previous panel, and they kind of answered all those questions in the previous panel. But one of that they started with supply chain, right? So supply chain is a huge problem, and just the difficulty of updating software, updating firmware when it's on the edge, the use of default passwords, the fact that you have nobody managing the security of your network on the edge, kind of like Brian's comment when you're in your home, there's nobody anymore managing the security, so you can kind of do whatever you want. And those issues start showing up.
Brian?
Yeah, for the existing ones, it's almost the same answer. I'll kind of go through them and we go through the new ones as well. Traditional ones, certainly supply chain. The links and RF attacks, particularly if you go out to autonomous systems and military DoD autonomous systems, are traditional attacks our adversaries put a lot of effort into. When we get to the new ones, I'll talk about censored attacks and admins. Human operator attacks have been going on for a long period of time. They're always easy and always ongoing. I always tell the free chicken and beer story. A particular combatant command ran an exercise, and the security officer sent out an email with everything possible wrong in it. Click here, open this PDF, click inside the PDF, and then click here again, and we'll give you free chicken and beer. And within a minute, she had 3 people who'd violated the entire network boundary. Right, and now again, going back to the COVID answer in the supply chain, what are we going to install now that we're going to just never use again for 17 months, 24 months, 3 years, still resident in our computer, 0 days been found, never patched, and we still have that resident on our networks. I think that's the
Well, okay, cool. This is some of that stuff that keeps people up at night. Jen.
Yeah, so I think obviously physical access is total access is in play here. So with a lot of these systems, for example, with the Ring doorbell, if you recall, there was a vulnerability where if you walked up to somebody's Ring and simply unscrewed it and walked away with it, you could gain access to their Ring account. Now, if you have ever had a Ring account, then you know that there's a history of videos available to you once you have access that shows who's been to your house when the residents have, come and gone, etc. So there's definitely, a lot to be said for the concept of your device, once it's attached to your accounts, becoming access to that account, because you're not always going to be there with that device. If it's something that's just sitting around in your home. I'm sure if anyone in the audience has an Alexa, somebody at some point has punked your Alexa. Hi, Alexa, order me some hot Cheetos, some fiery Cheetos. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so I'm going to start with Brian this time. And Brian, this is right in your zone. This is going to be a softball for you. What are the new attack vectors? Like, what in your evil mind, and I know Lloyd's done a lot of research, Jen does a lot of research. What are the new attack vectors that you think people are cooking up what are adversaries are cooking up for this new world?
So I rephrase it a different way, which would be where is the balance of attack, or where is the balance of good ROI on those attack vectors into an autonomous system or an edge system? So I put in the center my systems engineering, with one exception that they've changed significantly over the past few years. What I believe happens over time is, as we secure particular vectors, our adversaries focus their attention on other vectors that are now relatively easier to the vector we've attempted to secure. An example of the new one though is a sensor attack on an autonomous system or an edge system. And the idea there is, as you see large capabilities of swarming drones, think of what that would do to a system that you put in place 5 years ago, an inability to deal with, how do I deal with multiple hundred swarming objects around me while I'm in flight? You take it to the edge case and you watch it fail. And don't believe our adversaries don't do that calculation every day. The other one I see is supply chain. Supply chain is increasing, but not because I think folks are breaking into factories more on U.S. property, or people are necessarily implanting stuff into foreign-owned chip factories, but because they're being acquired. You acquire data source, you acquire source code, you acquire commercial relationships, which allow you to affect the supply chain inbound.
Yeah, so that actually
those are some of the things I think.
That reminds me of the I think the kids at UT did that GPS attack on a drone, and that's been used on the combat field as well, as far as like sensors and how that all works. So I'm gonna new attacks, Jen.
Yeah, so I think somebody mentioned attacks on sensors, and we saw that there was a Black Hat talk 2 years ago in which they attacked the drone sensors directly by just looking at the physics of how the sensor works and altering, messing with the sensor function itself. So there's been some interesting, developments with that, because we don't really often consider like, well, our sensors are designed to measure one specific thing. How can we, alter how that thing is measured, and what happens when we do that? Additionally, I think like a lot of these things are very dependent on these sort of artificial intelligence things that people have written, which like not the edge system itself, but they tie into a platform which is often looking at your buying preferences, your browsing preference, like what you've looked at on the internet, etc. And I know what I've seen with a lot of advertisers is there's no real authentication there for keeping track of the things that a user is looking at. So a lot of advertisers are just, you have an ID that identifies you, and that's sent along with a list of information about what you've done to the advertiser to aggregate. So if anybody who has that ID can then send false data about you. And then, your devices, which are supposed to be very smart and based on all of this information about you, are then making poor decisions about you as well. But that's less of that's less of an IoT issue and more of an AI issue, and an issue with how advertising online is done.
Yeah, fantastic. Lloyd?
Sure, I have kind of two answers, one a little less novel and one a little more. So a little less novel, obviously, Brian talked about swarms, right? He talked about multiple devices on the edge. They're typically going to be homogeneous devices, and they're all going to have the same vulnerabilities. So once our adversary gets into one, he's going to get into all of them and going to be able to jump from one to the other and maybe jump. There's not going to be any perimeter security around the swarm. So jumping from the swarm to something else nearby as they move, there's going to be a lot of different attack vectors as these things move and interact with other wireless networks. So that's kind of not that high tech. The other one, I think both Brian and Jen brought up sensors, right, and AI. We do a lot of work with adversarial AI, machine learning. So now you've got this autonomous systems, you've got these drones, they need to do navigation. They're going to be cut off from wireless for a while, maybe during combat. There's not going to be any network connectivity. So they have to stay up for a while without being able to ever contact a human. And then what are they going to rely on? They're going to rely on machine learning. And we know there's a lot of problems with machine learning. Everybody's counting on machine learning for automated vehicles as well as automated drones. But we know that the decision boundaries that are learned by machine learning problems are not necessarily the decision boundaries you want them to learn. And the deep learning networks that are guiding these machine learning techniques are a little bit inscrutable. It's really hard to understand exactly what they learned. So there's a lot of adversarial attacks that say, well, this is what you really learned, and we're going to make you do something different because we could figure out that you didn't learn what you think you learned. So we're going to make it look like there's something else here that you think. So you're going to react to an image that isn't really there, or you can react to the wrong image. There's been examples in the literature of people making stop signs looking like speed limit signs. So the autonomous vehicles go right through an intersection, things like that. And there's a lot of work in that right now, and that's kind of scary.
Yeah, that's very, very scary. I was thinking a little bit about. I mean, we see Amazon just announced the indoor drone that's going to be doing stuff. A while ago, Amazon also announced that they were going to be doing delivery by drone. So this stuff is coming up, and we're at the point of no return. It's happening. All right, so this is a classical question. Me being the cryptographer type and all that stuff. So the question is about key distribution and updates. And I know, Lloyd, you said we talked. The previous panel may have talked a little bit about this, but key distribution has been the problem with cryptography. I was in the Navy. Brian was also in the Navy on subs. How do you get the keys to a global, in our case, when I was in the military, you have ships all over the world, you have subs all over the world. How are y'all going to communicate securely? And that's a problem. That's a problem with autonomous edge systems and the software updates. We'd love for y'all to glean some light on that. I'm going to start with Lloyd.
Sure. Yeah, in the last session, they did talk a little bit about once you have physical access to an autonomous device or a drone, you can get the key out of it, right? So the keys are vulnerable right away. So you do need a way to change the keys over time. But when they're autonomous and when they're wireless, they're never going to be in the same place at the same time, where you can have like a three-way handshake and you can do your usual key exchange in order to refresh keys. So you have to have new ways to do that. One of the ways that we've looked at to do key exchange in an environment in which the devices are not in the same place at the same time is to use proxies, proxy devices that have cached keys for key exchange. But at that point, you don't want to have to trust the proxies. So one way to do that without trusting the proxies is to use something called homomorphic encryption or proxy re-encryption, in which you take a key, like an AES key that you want to distribute, and you encode that with the key of the destination. But you put another key around the key that you want to share with key exchange. You give that to a proxy. The proxy doesn't have the key to decrypt the key that you're sharing. Only the destination has the ability to decrypt the key that you're sharing. So it's a way to do computation, or in this case, just encrypting and decrypting keys that you want to share. So things like that we're looking at for these kind of unique and autonomous edge environments.
Man, that's fantastic. Jen, do you have any comments on this one?
Sure. So I think what's really interesting is the work that Apple has done on this issue with iPhones and iOS security in particular, which is similar to what Lloyd was actually talking about. I also think that we could learn a lot as a industry from developers who are working on reproducible builds. So the notion that right now when you build software, it may not always actually produce the same exact set of files on one machine as another, or not the set of files, but the size of files, etc. And so why is that? Like, is that an issue? Are we talking about a situation where like the software is actually different on one machine than on another? But if you have two systems building the same software, you should have identical results, and you should be able to verify that the results are identical. In cryptography, there has always been this particular issue with not knowing whether you can trust the endpoint that you're talking to. So let's say I have a super secret message and I need to send it only to my CEO. Okay, I don't know that my CEO's computer is trustworthy. So I don't know that only my CEO is getting the message, right? So right now, there's no easy way for me as a user to verify the security of my CEO's endpoint. And I think if we took some, if we took a step back and we redesigned our systems such that we could do that verification in the same way that people are doing reproducible builds, then we have gotten a little bit closer to closing that gap and getting to the point where we can trust that the endpoint we're talking to actually is what we would like it to be. But it's such a difficult problem to get right, and there's so many things that can go wrong in the implementation, which is why I work in offensive security instead of defensive security, because, hey, that's a really hard problem.
I appreciate that, Jen. Real quick, I just want to say we're going to let Brian get to this question, but if you're watching right now and you have a question, please send that question in, and so we can get these brilliant people to try to opine on some question that you may have. All right, Brian.
All right, thank you. Yeah, taking off what Lloyd and Jim both said, the tension between the offensive and defensive security is indeed a fun problem, and I think guarantees to keep all of us employed for many, many years. And our adversaries' efforts to defeat everything we come up with, again, to make sure that we're all gainfully employed. I will, because of my many years association with NSA, stay away from a large part of the encryption and key exchange questions. But I will say predominantly to not underestimate the capabilities that would be brought to bear by man-in-the-middle and man-in-the-side attacks. Be especially mindful of those as you prepare security solutions for those. But let me talk about something for a minute that you might not think about. The whole concept of long-lived intelligence and collection and later decryption, especially for DoD systems, which have a lifespan of decades. And sometimes, while you might be changing out your encryption quite frequently, you might not change out the endpoint systems as frequently. And what that brings up is if somebody collects your data, and then later on, they store it, they're very cheap, and later on when computational cost becomes more affordable from their perspective, they're able to decrypt your data. What will they find when they do that? Not only will they find, if it's an ISR platform, the sensor data, but they can easily go through and discern the network environment that you are operating in. They can understand your key exchange schemas. They can understand your key development, your key format, and they can probably figure out the C2 of the control plane. If they can do all of those things and you haven't changed all those things, they now have a lot of insight in which they can probably go into and do an injection. So there's something to be said there with matching up your systems changes with your encryption changes from a long-lived intelligence perspective or a long-lived operational data perspective, just so you match those up. What I would propose as we discuss those things is some sort of, again, if we go to edge and we come back to AI, anomalous and anomalous behavior detection and reporting mechanisms, where even normal activities, why was I forced to do a key change if I'm an edge device? Well, I don't care. I just did a key change. Well, did someone force that upon me? Is that abnormal? If I report that up to higher and my AI system can sift through that data, they will be able to say, I think someone has infiltrated this system or is forcing key changes on this particular edge system. I think those things are relevant to our future. And that's my thoughts on it.
That's great. Thank you for those answers. So we actually have a follow-up question on this particular topic, so I'm going to ask it right now. It's a question from the audience, Bobby Blunt. It says, are the panelists aware of new approaches or research efforts that provide encryption without the need for key distribution? So encryption without the need for key distribution. Who wants to take that first?
I'll touch on it briefly. We do have some work in attribute-based encryption, in which you do encryption that your key is based on things that are intrinsic to you, and you use those attributes as your key. So that's been out for a while now. Not necessarily anything new. I don't know if that's what the questioner had in mind, but that is one answer to that question.
So attributes. So what kind of attributes would those be, Lloyd?
Well,
a little bit more in depth.
something that's intrinsic to you, a combination of features that are intrinsic to you, maybe your IP address, maybe your address, maybe your phone number, things that you can put together that can't be spoofed, a combination of things that somebody's not going to be able to spoof.
Brian or Jen, you have anything to add?
Not an expert in this field at all, so I will stay away from that one.
Well, so something kind of closely related to this is I've been looking to myself, is zero knowledge proofs, being able to understand that you both have some kind of value without divulging that information to on the wire per se. So that's something that's very interesting. It's a lot of theoretical stuff, as just like anything we talk about, but the theory of zero knowledge proofs is quite interesting with exchanging information to me. All right.
Also, like,
Would you?
it's not really new, but you know, public key cryptography has been around for a while now. The idea of asymmetric encryption, basically, like, for example, RSA. And with that, I think like you are dealing with a situation where each person generates their own key, and that is kind of how you communicate. The issue is whether you can trust a publicly published key to actually belong to the person in question. So, you know, one thing I do like to do is hop on some kind of video call with someone so that I can see them and talk to them, and then ask them some question about the time we first met, or some other, like, you know, secret or joke that we've shared in the past, which is similar to what was mentioned previously about attribute-based encryption, I guess. So just something to verify that I really am talking to the person in question, to make sure that the key I'm being given is actually from them.
And I just follow up on that, Jen. That's going to get harder and harder to do. We're starting to present material on deep fakes, right? Deep fakes both visually and video, and now language as well. So you're going to have to get more and more intimate information about the people you're talking to be able to get past those deep fakes.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so the next.
Although a deepfake can't hop into a game and play it with me, probably. But yeah, I mean, it depends on how targeted the attack is, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm friends with Jen, and I can tell you, Jen, anytime I communicate with her, she's always using a side channel to verify me. Morgan, is this really you? So, okay, so this is something interesting to me. It's been interesting for a while. This is kind of like, it's kind of funny to me, but some people take it more serious than others. So I just threw this in to be more a lighthearted question. And we have a couple of more. So Tyler, who's Tyler? Sean? Oh, somebody's all right. So somebody asked a question. So about, okay, my bad. Somebody, I got a question, but they told me it's not for me. All right. All right. So what are the chances of the singularity happening? I'm going to start off with Jen, because I want to hear, because I know Jen, and I want to hear what she has to say. I have never asked her this question before, but go ahead, Jen.
I think if you look historically at like when major changes have happened in fields, it's always the result of a series of things sort of combining together to create what could be called an emergent event. And at that point of emergence, before that point, you couldn't tell what was about to happen. But at that point of emergence, you could see it actually happening. I do not see the singularity happening, right? I'm not even sure that the pieces that I am seeing will ever add up to the singularity. The classic example of emergence is a painting of a bunch of pieces of fruit, and on the painting itself, the fruit is arranged such that it forms a person's face. And if you look at each individual part of that painting, you just see a piece of fruit. But if you stand back and look at the whole painting, you see a face. So right now, I do not see a face to the singularity. And frankly, I'm not certain that all of the efforts that are being put into the research are actually ever going to show a return on investment. To me, it feels a bit like the search to churn lead into gold.
All right. Hey, Lloyd, I see you chomping at the bit. I'm going to say you for last because I think you're probably going to say something amazing. So hold on. Because I think this is Lloyd's field right here, the AI stuff. So Brian, what do you have to say? Hey Brian, did you freeze?
Yeah, I lost you all for a second. Are we all back?
Yeah, you're back.
All right, I love San Antonio. I'm assuming you punted that question over to me?
Yep, you're up, and we're talking about the singularity.
Yeah, thanks for giving me a question that I chuckled about as I went to sleep last night and thought about it. And what I don't stay awake worrying about it that often. I don't think it's going to happen in our lifetime. The two things I think is the computational power to be able to do that is out of our grasp with current physics. However, if we can cross that and come up with some serious entanglement and some serious involvement with graviton and pretty much every other piece of quantum physics out there, we will come up with that computational power. Guys, again. Okay, I'm back. Did you guys hear any of that?
I think I got the most of it. And if you can hear me, you said that computational power, we're not close to being there. It's not going to happen in our lifetime unless something drastic happens.
Not there, but and at the end of the day, what humans find to be of value to them is as esoteric and unique and changing as anything. It's not the result of a computational program. So I don't really think we'll get to the point that it will create value for us as a human being. It might create value for us as a business, but not as a person.
Roger that. So it's going to be a bunch of people making money off of it, talking about this and that, just like any other buzzwords, right? Lloyd, Lloyd, this is Lloyd's meat and potatoes. Lloyd, what do you have to say about it?
No, I don't want to disappoint you too much, Marcus. I don't really have anything very clever to say about the singularity. I can't say that I've been asked that before. In fact, when that AI movie with Steven Spielberg came out in 2000, they trotted me out in front of all interviews because they needed somebody to talk about it. And I had nothing to say about the singularity then, 20 years ago, and I have very little to say about it now. I think I said back then, I picked a random date. I said 50 years from now, maybe. And I don't think we're any closer now, 20 years later, than we were 20 years ago. So I'll go with 50 years again. Say, I think eventually something like that could happen, but it's pretty far off.
Yeah, thanks for that. There's a really good book, and I don't know if y'all read it before, but man, it totally. I lost the name of the book, but I'll come up with it later while y'all talking. Give me the answers. All right, so I think we did have another question real quick. Let me see if I can get to that real quick. And I'm going to say that to, well, actually, what I'm going to do here, I don't know if so the question is, this is from Brian Daniel. He says, who are the companies in Austin leading edge security defense? Who's the primary people making attacks, nation, groups, or individuals? Now, I know that, I don't know if you have to answer some of these questions, to be honest with you. I mean, from a security purpose, security clearance aspect. But in Austin, we have a lot of security companies here in Austin. Cloudflare is in Austin here now. I mean, like branch companies, Duo Security is doing a lot of stuff related to computing and no passwords and stuff like that. So what do you? I want to say, like, let's stick with maybe nations, groups, or individuals. Who are the primary people trying to attack this stuff? And I'll let y'all answer if y'all feel like it. Brian's going to be like, "Mom's the word," but Lloyd.
I mean, I could read the popular press like everybody else, and that's about all I could say. Is whatever else you read in the popular press is the attacks that you see. I mean, you see reports all the time by the companies that trace the attacks. These groups of hackers. I can't say that's all. That's all I know is what's out there.
Okay, whatever's in the news, cool. That's a great source of intelligence, by the way, is what's in the newspapers. Jen, you have any comments on what do you think is happening? As far as who's trying to launch these attacks, who's the bad guys? Who's the evil people out here trying to do stuff to hurt us?
It's funny because I just finished reading yesterday The Cuckoo's Egg, which is a book that was written in the late 80s. And it's by an astrophysicist who got sort of, he ran out of grant money and decided to go work net ops at his college back when they had giant Unix systems that everybody logged into, a single Unix system, and everything was connected by TimeNet. And in this situation, he had a hacker. They had an imbalance of 75 cents in their accounting. They couldn't figure out where it came from. And it turned out he tracked it down to being a hacker. And at first, for about halfway through the book, he thought it was just some random student trying to get free compute time. But it ended up being, after tracking the hacker for like a year, it ended up being like espionage, like straight up espionage. So it's funny because I feel like this story should be told maybe a little more often. It's hard to know for sure who it is that the opponent actually is. In many cases, it's some kid who was dumb and just having a little fun. And in some cases, it's something a lot more insidious. Just like the issues with authenticating keys and whatnot, you never really know who you're dealing with online, right? And so we're in this situation now where you will post something political, just something like, I thought Kellyanne's hair looked terrible today, or something stupid, but it's like kind of political. And then you'll have 20 responses on Twitter from egg accounts that are just like, you're anti-Republican or something like that, like terrible, like people trying to create and sow division between American citizens. And you don't know that those people are actually Americans and hold the same kind of values that you do. So it's
totally
difficult to tell online just when dealing with regular people, but it's also difficult to tell with adversaries. You have no idea who's attempting that password spraying attack, who's, if it's just some random kid who downloaded a database of breached information online, or if it's a nation state. You just don't know. And I think that's one of the scary things about our industry.
All right, Jen. Hey, thanks a lot for responding. So we have one more question, and I want actually, since this is Startup Week, since Lloyd and Brian work for larger organizations, how can a young startup approach somebody like you, Lloyd, or Brian, to work with you all on building solutions? Because there's a lot of people out here trying to build security solutions. What would be the best way to reach out to CACI? Oh, my bad. CACI, my bad. Or MITRE?
So I'll answer that from CACI. We're always looking to talk to startups. We have client executives that work for CACI that are go to all these events. In fact, Kevin Farmer, who put us together for this event, he's always looking for startups to talk to, and we're talking to them all the time. So find one of the CACI people that are helping organize these events and just give them your information, and you'll get in front of the right people at CACI.
Appreciate that. Brian, we're almost out of time. Go ahead. How can we reach out?
Let me be really quickly. We do the same thing. Let me give you 2 email addresses and watch my buddy Bobby get mad at me. But bb@mitre.com, mitre.org, and Digger at mitre.org are 2 folks at MITRE who do this innovation bridging and partnering. Bobby Blount and Russ Graves are their names. But bb@mitre.org and Digger at mitre.org. And if I could put one last thing is, if you want to understand the DoD's problems with cybersecurity, go read the DOT and E annual report. There's a cyber 5-page section in there. and it'll give you the best overview I've ever seen of the problems we're facing currently.
All right, that's good.
That's
hey,
it.
We're out of time. Hey, I really appreciate your time, and thanks for blessing us with your input. Jen, Lloyd, Brian, it's been real. I think Sean's going to come up and maybe kick me off the stage. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, great job, Marcus. Thank you all for being here and for the amazing conversation. I know I didn't get the answer to the question of when I'm going to have securely delivered autonomous parcels delivered to my house.
Man, I can't wait for that too, man. I order so much stuff on Amazon. People must think I'm running a drug cartel here. My wife is always on Amazon.
It's like Christmas every day. And
for real. All right,
well, cool.
Take care, man.
Thanks as always, Marcus. Appreciate it.